Good afternoon. Welcome to the event. My name is Chad Williams. To give you a little bit about my background, I like to say that I got my classical training in cybersecurity as a green shooter for the U.S. Army, doing offensive cyber operations, working for the NSA. I've been a security architect for Cisco. I've led investigations. I've led incident response teams. I've done mergers and acquisitions, divestitures, and I worked in the insurance space, as well as doing a current role, which is consulting. Um, all that, a master's degree in cybersecurity and an MBA and my CISSP as well as certified ethical hacker. I say all that to say that for a little bit of time, I've been doing security. And I'm very passionate about security. And hopefully you can walk away from this presentation understanding why you should be too. What I like to tell a lot of people that we work with, our goal and our job in security is to keep your executives out of jail and to keep your company out of the news. Some people laugh and say that briefs really well, but the truth of it is that's what we're trying to do. Is we don't want major breaches, we don't want big compromises. And what you'll see, hopefully, what you'll see is with the speed that business now moves, especially with global enterprises, you need more than just people to help solve your problems. So a quick intro, for those that aren't familiar, this is called the CIA Triad. It's confidentiality, integrity, and availability, not a government agency. It's just the way that we talk about it. Confidentiality means that any information that you have, people that aren't authorized to see it don't get to. Integrity is that information goes from one party to another that are supposed to see it, and it doesn't get modified anyway. And availability is availability. You get to actually use it without any undue or unnecessary interruptions. I speak with a lot of individuals and they say, well, how does security function? How do? And what they're boiling down to is how are things different in their industry than it is in another industry? And the first thing I would like to communicate with you is security doesn't care. Not that we don't care about your data, not that you don't have the best industry there is, but ultimately, when we're evaluating something from a security perspective, I don't care if you're a financial institution. I don't care if you're manufacturing. I don't care if you're retail, because the security principles are going to be the same across the board. Now, you may have PCI DSS or you may have HIPAA compliance that you have to deal with specifically in your environment. But at the same time, that's just a framework that we're going to overlay on the baselines that we do from a security perspective. And so it's minor tweaks and tuning, because ultimately what is correct for one environment is generally going to be correct for another one. And with that, what I want to discuss are those four fundamental principles. What you have here, and a lot of people want to talk about all the best tools and the best techniques and the best technology, and those are great follow-on conversations. But I want to take it back to the fundamentals. When the baseball team at the beginning of the year, they go to spring training. Football teams have training camp. Pretty much every sport, every professional athlete, you start the beginning of your season by covering the fundamentals. And ultimately, this is where the majority of customers that I'm seeing and organizations that I've ever dealt with aren't covering these four things. And therefore, you want to have a conversation about advanced pen testing and some really cool things that you can do. It sounds good. Buzzword bingo is awesome. But at the end of the day, you're not covering the basics. So you're going to be very ineffective when you try to dig deeper, because you don't have the information or data necessary to make educated decisions. The first thing I would say is, what do you own? Now, you can have a small organization, you've got 10 employees, you've got 10 endpoints. It's easy to have a conversation about what do you own. You don't let anybody bring their cell phones from home. You only have work calls or work people, 5 of them have it. So you have 15 total devices, maybe add a printer or two. There's not a lot there. Truthfully, the more you grow, the more it gets, and it's almost at an exponential rate. You have a medium-sized organization with 10,000 endpoints, that's going to result in millions of events per minute that you're going to have to be dealing with. So the first thing you have to know is, what do you own? The average cost of a ransomware breach is 4.62 million. If you don't know what's yours and what you're supposed to be protecting, how do you know if you're going to get hit? How do you know if something's going to be exposed that's not supposed to be? And the way I like to discuss it with a lot of people is take the analogy of your house. For argument's sake, you live in a house and you have a yard. If I were to walk on your property, you could stop me at the property line and say, this is now my property. This is what I own. You're not supposed to be here. But if I go to a local mall, for those that still exist, and I walk in the front door, you don't know who owns that, and you don't know if I'm supposed to be there or not. So if you can't articulate what the boundaries of your organization are, how can you then possibly hope to say, you're not supposed to be here? I walk in the front door of your house and I'm not welcome. You say, Chad, you need to leave. Because you know who's supposed to be there and who's not. That's knowing what you own. The second component that's very important is, what does it do? What is the purpose of the function? You set up a network with an ATM that talks to the backend server, and there's a camera associated with it. Those are the only three things on that network. So you can write explicit rules and permissions associated with it. So if anything else gets on there, you drop the traffic and it sends an alert. How did this individual's laptop get on that network? It's not supposed to be there. But if you don't know what you own and you don't know what it's talking to, then you can't start to identify anomalies or issues or problems that arise on your network, because you don't have visibility to make accurate decisions. The second thing, going back with that, or the third thing, is what does it talk to? You have the ATM, it's talking to the backend server, and there's a camera on the ATM, so only talk to those things. The ATM processes money, and it's talking to the backend server that processes the data feed to say, yes, there's money in that account, permit it to do so. The camera ties in, it records, and it ties in at a timestamp to say, hey, this person was here, this is what they're doing. So if somebody alleges they didn't take the money or they were compromised, you can go back from an investigative perspective and say, well, this is you on camera taking the money out. But we also see that behind you, there's someone with a weapon and they're robbing you. That's a little bit different than, hey, you're just there and you're taking the money out and you need to own that. So knowing what things in your organization talk to, then you can start knowing if they're talking to systems in another country that they're not supposed to. They're doing beacon call outs for potential ransomware. One thing you have with this is lost businesses represent a total cost of $1.5 million from an incident. So this is the downtime that you're going to have because you didn't know how to protect your environment. You didn't have processes in place to get it back up. And the last thing with this, and again, these I would say transcend any industry that you're a part of, is who is it supposed to be talking to? Which is very closely tied to who does it talk to. But I've seen before in an organization, it was reaching out to countries on another continent. And this was a US only company that should not have been reaching out to those. So being able to see who it's talking to, that's the first step. And then realizing that it's talking to someone that's not supposed to, that kicks off an investigation. Obviously, you have to have the processes in place and you have to be able to do the investigation. But now you have the data feeds necessary to make informed choices. What's going on? What's happening? What should we do next? An important thing to note is the average dwell time for a cyber attacker is between 3 and 6 months. To break that down, going back to the house analogy, that means that I've come into your house, I picked your lock, I made myself a key, and every day when you go to work, I come in, I make myself a sandwich. I sit on your couch and I watch TV. And I've done this for between 3 and 6 months, and you never realized I was there. I take my shoes off at the door. There's no footprints. They're doing the right thing so they can be in the environment. And many times what they're doing is they're either spreading their footprint, creating the possibility of redundancy in the environment. So if one mechanism of compromise is eliminated, they have other options to get back in the network. And then ultimately, one of the things that a lot of companies try to do is collect data and intel. whether that's personal information that they can turn around and sell. If you're a financial institution, that may be account data. It may be you're a company that has some proprietary formulas or proprietary data. If they can get there and they can steal your formula, they can cost you potentially millions to billions of dollars just in lost intellectual capital. Many people may be aware of what you have here on the left, the traditional engineering triangle. Fast, cheap, and good. You get to pick two. You can have it cheap and it can be good, but it's going to take a lot of time. You can get it fast and you can get it cheap, but odds are it's not going to be high quality. Or you can get it cheap and you can get it good, but it's going to drag out. So what you get is to pick two. What you see on the right is a more accurate representation of what you have when you're dealing with security, what you have when you're dealing with data, with governance, any corporation. These are the things that you want to see. You want it to be uncensored data. You don't want to leak it. It's got to be trustworthy. You want limited data collection, but you got to have the policies in place so that you're telling the people, hey, this is what we're collecting from them and this is how we're going to use that data. Obviously, from this view, two does not work. Picking two out of this means you have an organization that will not be successful because the back-end technology and security functions can't support business. That results in something like this. You have a lot of these data points that are interconnected. You have things that can improve your security, improve the confidentiality, improve the integrity, improve the availability, whether that's processes, people, or tools that are in place. They make the organization better. But at the same time, what they're trying to fight and contend with is shared logins that destroys your confidentiality, because it could say, I logged into a network, but if I share my password and username with you, you logged into that network and only I was supposed to see it. Now someone else has seen it. That's what you get. Availability. Many people are aware, obviously a power outage. Hey, you don't have power, a lot of systems aren't going to work. But what you get is DDoS attacks. This is the distributed denial of service where an attacker tries to take down your network. So legitimate traffic can't get in because the network bandwidth is consumed by illegitimate traffic. And obviously with integrity, you have what's known as a data breach. Those are one of the biggest things that you see. And that's when you have to make notifications that the data is gone. That's when you can get famous. That's when you get to be on the front page of the news. Something that most people don't want to do when you're running a business. What we see with these concepts, because many people around the world acknowledge that these concepts are important, what you get is something like this. I know this is designed and intended to be a little bit overwhelming, but this is, as much as reasonably so, the product suites that you can find for different areas. There's a lot. What choices do you make? And I'm not trying to steer anyone to make a certain choice of one system over another. This is a little bit deeper or higher level conversation than actually. It's, do you have the right things in place? Do you even know what tools you need based on your network, how it's built out, what's the vulnerability? A lot of surveys are saying that most organizations have more than 70 products in an environment. Now, from this list, you pick 70 of those. A good admin is going to be able to cover 2 or 3 of those devices at any given time in their day-to-day management activities. So from there, you have to have roughly 20 people just to manage those 70 products. On top of that, that's not counting for if somebody gets sick, somebody leaves, PTO, anything like that. So there's no redundancy built into place. To run an organization that has 70 products, you need people, you need bodies. And then the data that these are giving you can be absolutely overwhelming. You deal with a company that has 100,000 employees, it may have 120 to 150,000 devices. That's going to result in many, many millions of events and flows and logs and things that are happening on a network over the course of a minute or 2 or an hour, which will tie up to billions of events per day. It's overwhelming from the perspective of, I've heard it before. I've never validated that it's true, but they said if you go to the Smithsonian Museum, you can start and you can read every card of everything that's in the museum, and you would die before you finish reading everything because there's just so much data to consume. That's essentially what you have within any organization, and new data is being created. It's not like at the Smithsonian where it just sits there and you can go through there and look at the things that are important to you. What you have in most organizations is there's just a flow and a flood of data that comes in, and you semi-panic to figure out what you're going to do until you start leveraging tools that can help you focus down, where you would need to have hundreds or thousands of people to sit there scrolling through logs all day. This is where the crux of using AI, machine learning tools come into place. I'm not trying to replace people, but the argument that you make from a security perspective is I'm not trying to replace people, but what I'm trying to do is take some of the work that needs to be done, that has to be done with an organization, and let tools do that for you. So then your people can focus on the most impactful things. Because a person can think and they can use their brain, and there's a problem, there's an incident that they would solution, they can focus on doing that with the aggregated data that the tools are giving them from the collection points across your environment. That's where you get the merger of security and technology comes into fashion and can be the most impactful for a business. With all those tools that you see, sometimes what you get, if you're not appropriately provisioning and you're not evaluating the impact that something's going to do in your environment, is you get things like this. This is where they put a gate in there. They didn't want people to go, but there were no parameters around that gate that just prevent someone from bypassing it. So the money spent on this protection mechanism is completely wasted. There's not one set of tracks. There's dozens on either side. So that gate money was spent and it serves no purpose except to be a joke when we observe it like this. On the right, you have, it's a gate to bar people, but they built it like a ladder because that gate's going to only keep honest people out. If you really want to get in there, you're just going to climb right over it. Now, I don't know what's behind there. I don't know if it's worth it to do so, but a gate positioned this way is not going to help prevent people from going across if they really wanted to get there, because the barrier to entry has not been significantly raised to deter someone with malicious intent from crossing over that. And going back to the fundamental concepts that we have in the organization, if a government, people want to talk about nation state hackers and what they do. If a government that has the money, the resources, and the personnel decides they want to attack your company, there's very, very little that you can do. You could send a phishing campaign. You have 500 employees. All I need is one person to click on it. And then I'm most likely I'm going to be in your organization with their permissions. And let's see how far I can run, how wide I can go, what I can do. So what you need to do, what you try to do from a security practitioner perspective, is coach your executive suite that we can't be perfect. It'll never happen. There's always going to be something that happens. But if you can eliminate the low-hanging fruit, as you will, and raise the bar, the standard to compromise your organization high enough, then what you'll see is the truly motivated people will still come after you. But you eliminate a lot of the noise and the chatter that your organization is going to be hit with, because some of the easy stuff is not getting through your defensive network from a defense in depth perspective. So a phishing email may work. I have seen it before, that it was, oh, congratulations, you won a free Tesla. And the organization, well, there's about 10,000 people, 70 people said, yes, I'm happy, I won a free Tesla. And I ask every single one of them, did you enter to win? No, you were just excited to win one. And they didn't think, they just clicked. If it had been a real attack and not a phishing campaign, I would have had 70 credentials across the environment that could have been used to continue gaining a footprint and do more damage to that organization. Some people may be familiar with this. I love this case study because it is a glorious train wreck from a security perspective. So if you're not familiar, Norsk Hydro was an aluminum manufacturer that was hit with LockerGoga ransomware. What's important to know about LockerGoga, and to regress a little bit, there are two types of ransomware that you have. It doesn't matter whether it's state sponsored or, Joe, your neighbor, spun some up on his laptop and sent it out. Ultimately, you have two types of ransomware. You have the wormable type, which takes and leverages a known compromise and will spread itself from one environment to the other, using that compromise to hit systems that are vulnerable. And it will hit, land, install, and keep on rolling. The other type you have is more specific ransomware. It does not self-propagate, which means someone has to go onto your system, install that program, and then move to the next system and install that program. What you see in the Norsk Hydro case, LockerGoga, is not a wormable ransomware, which means every system that was compromised, someone was on that system and someone was able to install software. And then they triggered all of these systems to go down at one time. What that's telling you, that goes back to the 3 to 6 months of dwell time. I get into an environment, and from a attacker psychology perspective with this, what you're seeing is I get into that environment, I'm able to compromise the network, compromise the systems, and I start moving lateral from one system to another. What can I get off this system? What can I get off this system? Oh, here's some new credentials. There's a local admin. Then I can install persistence. Then I can keep going. Once I've collected all the information I need to, or compromise as many as possible, and I've gotten everything I want to it, then I would trigger the ransomware. Because what you're doing is you're going to brick the system, which makes it almost impossible to find out who did it, to recover the data, to figure out what was going on. Because I just took and jumped everything that I'd done. So you can't come back and go, oh, well, here was the point of compromise. Here's what they did. And here's how long they were in the system. It makes investigations terribly, terribly difficult to try to fight this. And that's whether you pay or you don't pay, whether they give you the code, they don't give you the code. That's kind of irrelevant in this conversation, because if you can prevent them from getting in there in the dwell time to begin with, if they had been detected at 3 days instead of 90 days, the damage that they could do would maybe be only 10 to 15 systems instead of more than 8,700. Going through this, what you see, within Norsk Hydro, there were 140 different operating systems, and that's Windows 98. I'd like to call your attention that this did happen in 2019. They still had Windows 98 systems and a PlayStation. And I don't know if that was an employee or that was a work perk, but you think they could at least splurge and get you a PlayStation 2. But there was a PlayStation in the environment. CVE 10 out of 10. That's the way vulnerabilities are scored in the security community. And the 10 out of 10 is saying that if I use this, it's going to give me the keys to the kingdom. It's as bad as it gets from that perspective. A 1 out of 10, that's informational. Maybe you get something, maybe you don't, not a big deal. A 10 out of 10 that was persistent in the environment for 9 years, nobody was looking at taking care of this. Nobody was trying to solve the problem to protect this environment. Even after the LockerGoga incident, you still had active infected systems reaching out, communicating to known command and control servers. This goes back to what systems do you have, who are they talking to, and who are they supposed to be talking to? If they had the proper protections in place to see that this system was talking externally, well, that's a bad thing. Then let's look at it. Who's it supposed to be talking to? It's only supposed to talk to internal things. And the great part about computers is they only follow the instructions that they're given. Even AI, and I'm not saying it's a magic bullet that's going to solve all your problems, but even with AI right now, it's still really fancy if-then programming. As of yet, the computers don't program themselves and they haven't taken over the world, based on my knowledge. But what you have is decision-making that can come of, is this good? Is this not good? Is this aberrant? Let's say that they're using a program that maps behaviors of systems over time, and then something comes in there and changes. Well, computer doesn't just change on its own. It doesn't go talking to point A for years and then suddenly it starts talking to point B because it got tired of talking to point A. That's not how they work. For it to start talking to point B, there had to have been a catalyst in the back end. Either the connection with A failed and B's the backup connection, or somebody went in there and said, hey, stop talking to A, go start talking to B. Either way, if you have the proper visibility, if you have the proper tools in place, you can trigger an alert on that. And from that alert, that can kick off an incident. That can kick off an investigation and go, this is what we need to look at. This is not what we need to look at. And another thing, there were more than 8,700 compromised credentials out of 35,000 people that work for the organization. So when you can have access to their servers to log in at the bottom, with 8,700 valid chances, I'm confident we could get into those systems. I didn't. That would be illegal. But I'm confident that you could get into those systems because you have a number of options available. And that's without any kind of legitimate attack associated with this. Going back to the fundamental concepts, if you're tracking your users, not in a creepy way, but in a, I know that they're coming from known endpoints across a VPN, and we're doing MAC filtering. And then you have a user that has lived in the UK their entire existence with that company, has always come in from a UK address, starts coming in from South Korea. You can alert on that, and then you could do one of two very simple things. Is you look at, do they happen to be traveling for work? No? Great. Then the immediate assumption would be they're compromised. Their credentials are compromised. And you could lock those credentials from any access across the network. And you can do that. The check, depending on what you have in place, may take a few minutes, but the possibility of alerting on that and locking that out could take less than 5 seconds. And then even if those credentials did get compromised, they can't legitimately be used to continue infecting the network with other problems. So to wrap it up, why do you care? Chad, you talked about a lot of security stuff. I didn't touch AI heavy because at the end of the day, I'm not trying to steer you to a particular product. I'm not trying to steer you to, oh, use this thing or don't use this thing. But the questions you need to ask at a strategic level within your company, answer these questions, and that can help dictate, do we need to partner with somebody in AI? Do we need to leverage technology to make sure that our people can do the things that need to be done in the organization and defend appropriately? Or, no, we're good. We already have this area covered. We already have this area covered. We don't need to talk about these certain things because maybe they don't apply. But if you don't know what you own, how can you ever hope to protect what's there? Going back to your house. Well, you own land, but you don't know how much it is. And so people create a bike trail going through it. Well, you think you own it, so you put up a fence. Then the local municipality comes by and tears the fence down because you didn't have the authority to put up the fences where you did. Or more importantly, you have an outbuilding that you didn't realize was yours. And there was $1 million sitting in there given to you by a long lost relative. But since you didn't know it was yours, people could come and go in there and they were to take that money because you didn't know that you were supposed to protect it. That's obviously a little more scary than protecting an area that's not yours. But across an enterprise and across a network, if you don't know what you have, you can't protect it. And then what does it do? So if you don't know what to expect out of a device, if you don't know what to, a bicycle, if you've never seen the way a bicycle works, you can see, maybe I can discern that there are wheels. Maybe it looks like a seat. I don't know how to use it. So someone who's never seen a bicycle work, they don't have an expectation for going from walking to now I can move faster. And then they see a plane. If they don't know what flight is, they would never have an expectation that you could move at hundreds of miles an hour over long distances. So they can't be prepared when reality changes and it shifts to adapt to that because they're taken by surprise. Who does it talk to? If you tie your network security, your flows, any tools that you have into a robust identity and access management solution, then you can know who's in your environment, the devices in your environment, and who's talking to each other. Once you start knowing those things, then you can actually start mapping. Well, this user falls in an HR workspace and they talk to these devices at all times. Now, suddenly this user reaches out here and is trying to access the finance systems. Create an alert, create a flag, and then let your people do an investigation on that. Hey, did they get a new job? No. Are they still doing the same things they were before? Yes, but they've also added these new things. They're going to places they're not supposed to go. They're accessing resources they don't have permission to do so. You can lock them out, you can lock it up, and you can find out, hey, were they compromised? Was it a system compromise? Was it a credentials compromise? Those are things you can do with appropriate tooling and resources across your environment. And then who's it supposed to be talking to? Just because something's on your network doesn't mean it's supposed to be there. But if you can't identify everything that's on your network, if you can't sit down, if your CISO or your CEO or someone in the executive chain comes and sits down and says, tell me what we have right now. In the same way that you do it with a CFO, how much money are we making? You better believe a good CFO is going to be able to tell them, these are our projections. This is what we made last quarter. This is what we're doing. But on the security side of things, it's vitally important that we can have those same conversations. You sit down, what were our dispositions of incidents last month? How long did it take to remediate them? Do we have any outstanding issues? What's our current tech debt? How's that going to impact us in a potential merger, an acquisition, or just in the general day-to-day business? What compromises could we experience? We didn't, the CVE 10 out of 10 that was open for 9 years. Chances are pretty good from an insurance perspective. That's not showing due care, which means insurance isn't going to want to pay out because you didn't do the necessary protections to put those in place because you didn't leverage the tools that were available. At the speed that business moves, an army of security professionals could not mitigate risk without appropriately scoped tools to help the fight. This includes communicating risks and progress to the stakeholders. So even if I know everything that's going on in my environment, it goes back to the conversation of someone in the C-suite comes and says, tell me, give me the narrative associated with the environment, what's going on and what we're seeing. And this is where you can also leverage tools in this case too. Whatever the organization's flavor is, however you best communicate with them, both your style and what they like to receive. But I can tell you, almost across the board universally, I can give you a single page written out with 800 words. It's very, very technically in detail. Or I can give you a simple graph or a simple picture or a pie chart to show this is the disposition of where we are here in red, yellow, and green. And then we can drill into these are the red and these are the yellow, because most of the time, if it's green, don't talk with them about it because they don't care because this work is functioning as intended. So with this, what I'm hoping you understand is security transcends most businesses that you have. And if you can answer these 4 questions, then you can start having a conversation about what tools can we use to help our people make impactful decisions and processes to be as valuable as they can be in your environment. Thank you.